Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And we're going to talk about something today that I firmly do believe is one of the things that you have to be doing to make your business successful. We're going to be talking about podcasting. So joining us today is Ryan Estes. Welcome, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Deb. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. I love it. And, I have to say, I love the fact that we are talking to you and you are in Denver, you're home. We've been here almost 10 years, but people say, where do you live? Or where are you from? Right? Where are you from? And I say, well, we live in Atlanta, but we are from Colorado.
Yeah. It never leaves you. You can leave the state, but the state doesn't leave you.
I know. Yeah. We are from Colorado until the day we die. Right. And then, of course, we went to the same university. So, just so many overlaps here.
I love it.
Perfect. I love it. Well, I always like to ask my guests how they got to where they are today, because I think it's very interesting to know how it is that you discovered that, at least for right now, this is your passion in life. So tell us a little bit more about it. Oh, you know what? I was so excited. I didn't even tell your bio. Let's step back. Let me read your bio and then we'll jump into that.
Perfect.
So Ryan Estes is an American Buddhist entrepreneur. As the founder of Kitcaster, a podcast booking agency, he facilitates thousands of extraordinary conversations. Prior to Kitcaster, Ryan owned a media and marketing agency for 10 years. For 8 of those years, he hosted the Founders Podcast, Talk Launch. Consistently ranked in the iTunes Top 100 podcasts, he recorded 300 plus interviews with more than 250,000 downloads. He's married with 2 kiddos in, as I said, Denver, Colorado. He enjoys training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and has a purple belt, and cap wearer. I think I said that right.
I
knew I was going to get this wrong. And he has a green, yellow cord in that. He also volunteers as a finance mentor and is an avid sportsman. Seriously, you live in Colorado, you have to be an avid sportsman. So again, Ryan, welcome. Now tell us how you got to where you are today.
Happy to do it. And thanks for doing the introduction, Deb. I appreciate it. So, as my bio implies, I was working in media. I really started my career in music. We both went to the University of Colorado at Denver, and I studied music business. That was back when there was a music business to study. So what we have now, who even knows? Everything's free and artists don't get paid. So, when I had 2 very young children, I switched careers and kind of moved into media and marketing, web development, stuff like that, and was actually the first social media marketing company in Denver. And we did really well. A part of what I really missed about music was the camaraderie of being with the guys and the gals, just like hanging out at band practice, drinking some beers, talking trash. When I discovered podcasting, is particularly like comedy podcasting, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just it. This is band practice without the instruments. So as I left my music career, it kindled my podcast career, because it gave me a reason to get back together with my buddies and just kind of talk trash and publish it to the world. And that podcast did really well. But I really was intrigued with the medium itself, particularly for my business, which was growing, and as a means to speak to really interesting people and, both validate some of my ideas, see where they were struggling, see if I could be of service for them, if they could be of service for me, and just get to know each other. it's really kind of an intense introduction to a person to be speaking to them with headphones and microphones, and it's going to publish. There's a little like electricity in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of fell in love with the medium, and did that for many years. Brandy Whalen, who owned a PR company here in Denver, used to send me her clients. She worked largely with startup founders here in Denver. Denver's got a great tech scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so she'd bring me her clients and I'd interview them. And she and I just clicked, and we were having coffee one day and she's like, let's work on a project. So we kind of came to the conclusion that we want to do something in podcasting and started throwing out ideas. And this idea for a podcast booking agency sounded novel. It sounded like it had opportunities. And I think where we really got excited about it is the way that you would scale a podcast booking agency, which is just like a talent agency, is kind of old school. It's like relationship building, it's building a team, handshakes, emails, phone calls. The way you scale is with bodies. And both of us had kind of gone through the ringer of SaaS and B2B and lean and mean type startup stuff. It sounded fun, So September 2019 was our official launch.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of started with a pilot program, found some success, wrapped a brand around it, launched it in September 2019. So we're a little more than 2 years into it now. We've got, I think, 18 employees and, loving it. It's just been so fun, and able to connect with folks like you, Deb, has been amazing. And it's really cool.
Cool. I love it. And it's kind of one of those businesses that launched at the right time before the pandemic hit. Because you can obviously do everything you do virtually. As long, I tell people, as long as I have Wi-Fi, it doesn't really matter where I am. But I think, especially from a podcaster's perspective, we had potential guests coming out of the woodwork. And it was because they all of a sudden were not able to go speak at conferences. They weren't able to do all of those things that they had done before. And they also sat down and thought, what message do I have to give? And so did you really find that things just blossomed because of the pandemic for you?
Yeah, absolutely. We were super terrified like everybody else, we all going to die kind of thing. But it turns out that like podcasting became something that business leaders could do. Everybody went home, for what was it, 2 weeks, and it ended up being 6 months.
I know, I love that. It's only going to be 2 weeks, and all of us went, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It ended up being 6 months, but for founders, oftentimes, particularly if they're process systems driven, maybe they're a little mature, they have a couple of funding rounds. They've got director of marketing, they've got director of sales, they've got fulfillment, they've got customer success. Everybody's working. Everyone kind of managed to pull it off through Zoom calls and at home. But then for founders, like, well, what do I do? How do I show leadership? And podcasting really stepped up right there. Podcasting too, prior, we were still a young business, but we'd see probably 20% of shows were still going to a recording studio or a podcast studio, or they brought guests in where it was kind of advantageous for everyone to go home, as everyone became intimately understanding of Zoom.
Right.
Like,
oh, yeah.
wow,
all of a sudden, that's how the world functioned.
Yeah. And it's like, well, why would I spend an hour in traffic to record this podcast when we could just zip into here on Zoom and we got it. So, serendipitously, we were a little bit in the right place at the right time.
And it really, as you said, we all of a sudden had to get very used to Zoom, and there was that kind of awkward period of time where it didn't always have the right equipment. It was really fun to look at somebody's unmade bed behind them, some things like that. But then we realized this is a great way to function. We don't have to go all these places. For me, it's great because, and we'd obviously been pre-recording for years before this started, but I can talk to people from around the world, and because we can pre-record, that makes it easy to do. I mean, this week we're actually getting ready for the holiday break, and so I've got 6 interviews scheduled this week. So we get all of that done, and technology is just fabulous to be able to do this.
It's incredible. It really is. I mean, I was a little bit, I don't know, in the beginning, I was kind of like, oh man, this is terrible. But, it's really changed the entire cultural landscape of work in a way. Now, when I get stuck with windshield time, it drives me crazy.
Right.
It's like, man, it was just so wonderful to be able to like put in a nice, 8-9 hour day in your home office and be done. It's great. Now, we also made the decision to hold an HQ here in Denver because there's also like something very advantageous about coming together.
Yeah, there's something about that personal connection.
100%. So we got to mix the two. And I think that's kind of the balance we're looking for. I personally think that like working remote and not kind of like babysitting the time clock, there's something innately human, and there's just a human dignity of giving somebody the respect of like, manage your time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
if you get your work done better at 11 p.m., fine, as long as you're getting the work done and you do the required meetings. I mean, but yeah,
and that really resonated with me. There was something a long time ago studying business, and I've always had tyrannical, terrible bosses, which kind of pushed me in an entrepreneurial
you had to be under
direction.
their thumb, right?
Yeah, they're evil, and so I was like, it pushed me in the entrepreneurial direction, but also made me a little gun shy about like wanting to be the boss, but I follow Gino Wickman's kind of traction model really closely, because once you start to assign everybody a number, then my job as a leader is to help people achieve their number, as opposed, and however they do that, we're outcomes based. So if you hit your number, awesome, man. But if you're not, like, hey, how can I help you? There's no micromanagement, or as little as possible. And of course, some folks need extra guidance and assistance at different times, and things always come up because it's life. But just to bring it back to Zoom, I think Zoom has facilitated this in an extraordinary way where we can just pop right in here.
It's going to be interesting the next year-ish to see where things, because there's going to be some more technologies that develop, and the whole thought of the concept of hybrid, I think, I don't know if that's really going to work an awful lot. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were in their office. It was funny. They were at CU Boulder, and they were in their office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and working from home Tuesday, Thursday. And they said, didn't matter where they were, the file they needed was in the other location. And so hybrid, I mean, it's going to be interesting. But I think, to bring us back to podcasting, that's one of those things, no matter where you are, if you've got that equipment, you can do a podcast. And in fact, for people who are doing quite a few, it may work better for them to be in their home office, because they might be recording at 9:00 at night, depending on which podcast they're on, all sorts of things. And as long as your background is, fairly, respectable, you can be doing this at any point in time.
100%. Plus, it gives you something fun to go shopping for. Who doesn't want to buy microphones and headphones?
Right.
It's a good time.
I know. And cameras. I'm like, oh,
cameras, lighting, and like something to nerd out for. So
I know. But to be honest, though, that is something that also scares people, because they're like, oh my God, do I have to have all of that? And, I've done just as many podcasts of people who I know are using their iPhone, and as long as the audio is good, I mean, that's the important thing. But, I always tell people, it's not now, if you are having a podcast, there's a lot more expense to it, because, there's just a variety of things that go into it. But to be a guest really doesn't take a big, cash outlay.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot more moving pieces when you have your own show, as you well know, 700 plus episodes. When we were kind of conceiving what would become Kitcaster early on, we kind of thought about that, about producing big shows, and ultimately we decided not to, largely because of that reason, because there's the expectation kind of falls off a cliff. You have all this enthusiasm about putting the show together. You get a couple of shows out and you're like, wow, that's a lot of work, So I don't think that should be discouraging to folks. Right. I just produced enough shows that I knew that really you have this peak enthusiasm and then it wanes.
Mhm.
And if they haven't created a system for themselves that's kind of self-sufficient to support the
Right.
podcast,
Mhm.
they might just drift.
Mhm.
So, as far as being a guest, it's a great way to have an amazing podcast experience where you go as a guest on other people's shows.
Mhm.
And there's a real reciprocity behind it, whereas you can share your expertise.
Mhm.
And in exchange for that, you get access to the audience that the podcast has worked really hard to build. So I think it's really cool, and I think that at the core of podcasting is what makes it so unique, that it started off free
Mhm.
as opposed to, music, which started out really expensive and then just became free. So
Right.
because it starts with kind of this reciprocal kind of like principle baked
Mhm.
into it, I think it enhances the experience for everybody.
Right. Well, let's kind of talk some of the basics. Why should a business leader, even think about being on podcasts? I mean, what is the appeal to it, and why should they do it?
And our clients, they have all kinds of different reasons they want to do it. But the outcomes are totally central to what we're doing. So when we begin a campaign, we'll have a discovery call where we start with like, hey, what are the ideal outcomes of this campaign? We work largely with, funded startup founders, entrepreneurs with exits, C-suite executives. So usually they have a pretty good idea of what's lacking.
Mhm.
Everybody wants prospects. So we definitely want to move the needle in business where we can with podcast interviews. But then there's other varying kind of stuff. There's probably just straight brand differentiation where people are like, hey, I'm in a really competitive market. We all have various flat blue logos. How are we going to make a difference for our brand? And podcast becomes a great opportunity because particularly if there is like highly undifferentiated markets, getting to know the founder of the company a little bit or the CEO of the company a little bit may be the reason you pull the trigger. So, just brand awareness is a huge one. We also see a lot of folks looking for recruiting, particularly in SaaS and tech. Everyone's like competing for the same engineers, and there's a lot of perks. So, talking about your culture and like the kind of people that work really well at your company has been great for that. Because we do work with a lot of SaaS and startup, fundraising, they're always kind of on that wheel. So, using podcasts specifically to speak to audiences that are looking for early to mid-stage investment opportunities has been really successful. So really it's just, we sit down, hey, what do you want? And then that kind of leads us to an audience, and from understanding the audience, that leads us to kind of a various categorical podcast to start to pitch them to.
It's interesting. The one thing you didn't mention is going on and saying, hey, buy from me, buy from me, buy from me.
Yeah, nobody likes that. It doesn't work.
The neon sign going, danger, danger, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, humanity evolved around a campfire telling stories. That's what people want to hear. If they're interested in your product, they'll go find it. Especially people are on their phone, they're folding laundry, they're doing dishes, listening to podcasts. What are they going to like? Dry their hands, go to your website,
Right.
And
buy the latest widget that you're selling.
Yeah, it's not a sales positive atmosphere. Caveat being, we see a lot of sales from podcasts.
Yes, I mean, and that
is,
let's be honest, it's in there. It's just, you said one of the key words, story. It's part of that story that you're telling.
Yeah, exactly. They get to the end of the podcast. They're like, Deb's cool. I'm going to go check out our website. And then there's a whole experience of discovery, or they listen to a show. Deb's awesome. I'm going to share this product with my friend. Hey, I listened to this podcast. You got to check it out. I think it'd be perfect for your business. So there's just kind of like this baked in kind of network virality, I think, through podcasting. That's wonderful. We see it all the time. It's challenging, however, maybe if you're a marketing director, because oftentimes it doesn't fit neatly on spreadsheets.
Right.
So we'll get drilled by the marketing director, like, oh, what's this, and this. It's like, well, man, this isn't a CPC campaign. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it works very successfully for people that have very clear objectives and ways they're going to measure the success of podcast campaign, and also people that are really committed to, personal development, going on podcasts and learning how to tell your story and how to connect to audiences without being salesy, but imbibing the passion with what you do. Is a skill that you master over a lifetime if you're lucky, and podcast becomes kind of a playground where you can work on that.
Right. And it's kind of that old, argument between advertising and public relations. Podcasting really is a function of PR.
Yep.
And I'm an old PR person. That's what I started doing, way back a long time ago. And it's interesting because it's PR is about telling that story. You're never sometimes quite sure what's going to happen. I remember one time I worked for somebody and they said, well, we wanted it to say this and this and this and come out on this day. And I said, well, that's called an ad. That's not a press release. And, and sure, you develop relations with the media, but it's still, you are at their mercy almost to do that. And what I love about podcasting is, it can be as long or as short as you want. I mean, mine is a little bit of an anomaly because it's an hour. Most podcasts, I think, average about 30 minutes. But I find that at the 30-minute mark, I still have so many more questions that, we just have to keep going for an hour anyway. But it really is, it's about telling that story. And that's what public relations is. It's building the goodwill with public.
Totally. And what's cool and maybe novel about podcasting is it puts you in the driver's seat. You're not working with a publicist crafting your narrative. It's like, hey, for better or for worse, open your mouth and solve your problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Sometimes it's worse.
It's obviously, podcasts like mine, I'm not doing any gotcha interviews or anything like that.
Yeah.
But there certainly are those that are out there, but it's just, like with anything, what you get when you're going on, or you should. I mean, if you haven't done your research, then you don't know that. But yeah, it's, there is some basics, like, I used to do media training. It's a little bit of the same thing. You have to be comfortable in front of a mic. You have to be, if it's going to be video, you have to be comfortable in front of the camera, some things like that. So there's some basic things that you need to know. And you have to know what you're going to talk about. I mean, that is the important thing. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, Ryan, I want to be a podcaster. Now what?
Well, if they want to build their own show, I know some absolutely amazing people that do just that. So if you're thinking about, I want to build a podcast,
and it is very different than being
it's totally different.
A podcast guest.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to build your own show. One thing you should also be thinking about is how you're going to launch that show. Because if you put a lot of pride and care into your show, and you have one listen and it's you,
your mom.
There's nothing wrong with that, but why not give it the same energy?
Small.
Of course, absolutely. Right. And small is oftentimes better, to have a good niche, but you should be mindful of how you're going to launch and have a go-to-market strategy for your podcast. So if somebody comes to me, I send them to the best in the business. One kind of unique thing about Kitcaster is we had opportunities to do a little of this, little of that, different things. And I'm guilty as maybe other founders of chasing shiny things.
Squirrel.
But we've exactly. But we really focused in with Kitcaster to do just one thing, and that's book entrepreneurs on other people's podcasts. So it gives us this great opportunity that if people are looking for something and resources outside of the podcast guesting kind of category, then we can make referrals to some of our partners and vice versa. So, we set out to be the world's best at this service, which means a lot in different vectors. But one of those is like creating relationships. So somebody's like, hey, I want to make a podcast. I'm going to be the first person in their corner, tell them they should do it, and then make the referral to somebody else. If somebody's like, says, hey, I just want to go on people's podcasts, I want to be a guest on podcasts. I'm like, well, you're in the right place now.
Right. So if I tell you that, what are the steps?
You bet. So it's an easy kind of 3-step process. First step is to really identify the outcomes, the audience, and the podcast we're going to pitch, which we kind of covered. Second step is we build media kits specifically for podcasting.
Okay.
Deb, I'm sure you've seen a bunch of them. They all kind of look really cool. It's a web page. It has kind of the mission, identity.
The all important one sheet.
The one sheet. Yeah. And it gives opportunities for hosts to know what you want to talk about, so not only topics that you want to talk about, but questions you like to be answered. We really want to tee up their best stuff and give them the best opportunity, and give the podcast host a lot of opportunities to talk about different things that might be intriguing to them. So we get the media kit together. And then the third step is really what we do every day. There's 18 of us here in Denver that manage the pitch, the pre-production, and scheduling of the show. So basically, from the information that we've gathered, we've kind of galvanized that into the media kit, and then we go in pursuit of great podcast placements. The engagements are usually about 6 months, and we usually put people on about 3 shows per month. So
that's a good number for people who are going, ooh, 3 is really, that's 1-ish a week. You do have other things you're doing, right? You should be running your business. So
yeah. And the folks that we work with are like type A, they're going a million miles an hour, and their time is very precious. So, we really kind of, with about an hour per week, you can, if you got a floating hour in there, we can put you on these podcasts.
Right. And I love it when, I get, as a podcaster, I get pitches, I get probably 5 a week, and very rarely do I actually turn somebody completely down. And that's more just because it's not a business topic. We can't figure out how to make it a business topic. And, and so I like you, I refer them to someone else, but, I have the people who are the do-it-yourselfers, and then I have the agencies, and it's, it's not good or bad either way. I love working with agencies because there are times where I go to them and say, oh my gosh, I've got a hole. I need somebody here. Plus those, you said something about this earlier, relationships. I have some relationships with some agencies where I know if I go to them, I'm getting a good guest, or if they come to me, it's not just, hey, we've got 5 people that we're pitching this week. It's, here's the one person that we really think would be good for your program.
100%. Yeah. And, agencies, hopefully they're doing that. They're saying like, hey, we've got a perfect guest that will hit it off with Deb. Let's go. Right.
And you can do it yourself. I get probably about a quarter of the people that come to me are do-it-yourselfers. And, there's obviously nothing wrong with it, but you do have to know the steps you need to go through. Just like, when you're working with somebody, you have to know what you're going to talk about. I love it when I get the ones I can talk about a variety of topics.
Such as?
And I'll be honest, from my perspective, if I have to work at it, I'm probably not going to, and it's not that I'm lazy. It's that I expect that to have already been done. So I want somebody to come to me and say, hey, I have these 5 topics that I can speak about, or, I'm an expert in this area. Here's that, because the less I have to do, the better that is. Now, I still research it. If somebody's an author, I read their book. If they are, I always go to their websites. I go to their LinkedIn pages, all of those things. I'm not just going to sit here and say, so Ryan, tell me what you do. But yeah, make it easy for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's say one thing I like to say too is like, maybe have a little twinkle in your eye, like help by being present on the conversation. which is easier for some people and,
Right.
and kind of challenging for other people, because podcasts tend to be more conversational. There's a give and take, as opposed to an interview where it's just I'm sitting here patiently for you to
Right.
lob questions at me, and then I give succinct yes or no
Mhm.
answers.
Right.
That can be kind of a conversation killer. I mean, it's like, would you want to talk to that person at a cocktail party?
Right.
Probably not. How was your weekend? Fine. You're like, all right, cool. Later,
Okay.
man.
Yeah. I mean, that is the nice thing about Zoom is it is more like a conversation. I mean, clearly we used to do these, just audio. And yeah, when you can see somebody, it is just a much better conversation.
100%. I totally agree.
And I ask my guests, what do you want to cover? I mean, and it's funny. There are times where ask them this question.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I mean, because for me, it is part of the conversation. I long ago when we first started this, I had mentioned this was a live program, and my guests came into the studio too, so it was great fun. I mean, it was a ton of fun, and I was interviewing someone from a nonprofit in Denver. And it was actually a nonprofit I volunteered for, so I knew quite a bit. And it was that it was great. And their director of special events was who I was talking to, and she came in with her questions from the executive director. Now you will ask this and this and this, and I looked at it, and went, and so we did question 1 and 2 and 3, and then I skipped to like question 7 because the conversation took us there. And I get this deer in headlights look, and I can tell she's thinking, I'm going to get fired. I was told you have to. And so I'm like, it's all right. We'll cover all of this. But to me, to be a good podcast guest, it is about being able to follow where that conversation may go. And sometimes I'm like squirrel, and I do go off in some wonkadoodle way.
That's more interesting anyway.
Yeah,
I mean,
I forget to do your bio at the start.
I was interviewing a gal once. She was a brewer at a brewery here in Denver. I don't know if you've heard, but we've got some of those.
You've got 1 or 2. Yeah, the one big guy and then everybody else. But
if you throw a rock, it'll bounce off a dispensary and hit a brewery in Denver.
Yeah.
But this is a rather large one. And I brought up like, hey, I noticed like in your packaging, like you changed the label so that the lady on the label looks less feminine. Why is that? And maybe she felt like it was a gotcha question. I was just curious. I was like, it looked like the lady on the label changed clothes. What's up with that? And that was probably as close to something edgy or on the line that I ever got with the show, because one thing, and maybe you can relate to this, is there's a certain trust that's baked into having somebody on your podcast, which is to say, I'm not going to make this hard for you. Right. Like, let's stick to the conversation topics that you're comfortable with. Right. But like, let's walk towards the line a bit. So after speaking with that gal for a while, I think that the tough thing was she wasn't the founder of the company and she didn't make the decision. So she's like, I don't know why the gal on the label changed clothes.
So then she's like, I have no idea what to say.
I was like, oh, okay, cool. I was just curious. Yeah. But
there are times where I will ask a guest in the pre-chat. And everybody does it different. Some people do a whole meeting before. I'm like, nah, we can spend 5-10 minutes before. But I'll say, okay, I was talking with someone about an example, women in leadership positions here in the United States. We do have a lot of international listeners. And so I asked her, I said, do you have any expertise in or knowledge about women leaders in other countries? And she said, nah, not really. I said, okay, then we don't go there. If she had said, oh my gosh, I want to talk, I'm like, oh, okay, fine. I had a guest, I'm interviewing her later this week, who part of her life story and part of how she started her business was she was a victim of abuse as a child. And she said, is it going to be okay to talk about that? And I said, yeah, I mean, it's part of your story. But, that was very good on her part to ask that in advance rather than just all of a sudden spring it on me in the middle of the interview.
Yeah, totally. Trauma and things like that. We'll do the same thing. Oftentimes we'll say, is there anything about you that we should know that would help you to book you on podcasts or that you want to steer away from, and sometimes people are very open about their trauma, and it becomes like, it comes like kind of like a superpower. Like that's the main thing they want to talk about. And other folks will be like, actually, I'm uncomfortable with this and this. And so we can be specific with that, because you want to make sure that everyone's comfortable and confident, and that it doesn't get too emotional unless they want to do that. And then there's a place for that as well, but it's a really important consideration for sure. It's just like people's like capacity for big emotions, because definitely in podcasting, big emotions come up. Oftentimes it's leading up to a podcast for people that are new with it. What are we going to talk about? What are they going to say? Oh my gosh, I looked at Deb's roster. She's had such killer guests. I'm not good enough, or I'm too good for this. There's just it comes up, so usually we're prepared for that because we've done it so many times.
Right. I think the funniest one I ever had, this was, we're still using Skype, and I was talking with a guest about online security. Okay. This is a great topic, right? And doesn't matter when or where, it's a great topic. And so I said something about Skype, and he says, well, I don't use Skype. And I said, okay. That's how we record the interview. And he said, well, but someone might listen. And and luckily he couldn't see my face, because I really had the eye roll thing going. And I said, you do understand that's the goal of this.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And he was like, oh,
right. Like,
and we did the interview and it worked out fine. And I'm pretty sure then he, took Skype back off of his computer. But yeah, I was like, okay. I know I try and make it like it's a chat just between the two of us, but we really do hope when we have listeners.
Yeah, totally. We want to encourage them to do that. We're not trying to hide.
Right. But that brings me to something that a lot of my guests and whether it's the guests or the promoters, when I know that my program has been listened to in advance, now that gets you major kudos. If I get a pitch from somebody and they say, hey, we just heard your interview with Ryan Estes, we thought it was great. We would like to, even if they don't even say anything much about it, just the fact that that means that they went to my webpage, right? Or they went to iTunes, but it's also a great way, if you're going to be a guest, you should listen to a couple episodes to see what their style is. Is it rapid fire? Do you get to have a lot of time to give answers? I mean, all of those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it helps you understand the pace of the show. It helps the personality of the podcast host. Usually I'm pretty good about like kind of doing some research and going and checking out the show before, but I've missed it. And podcast I was on recently, I missed it. And boy, I blew it, because this guy's energy was like at an 11. I mean, he was screaming, he was going nuts. It was like, it was like 7:30 in the morning here. And I was having a really hard time pacing and like holding his energy, which I feel like if I would have known what I was walking into, I would have got up early and done push-ups.
Had some extra coffee. Yeah.
I just couldn't reach his energy,
Right. And that is part of it. Are they high energy? It's really funny when, we moved here, I had someone who listened to my podcast, and he came up to me, and I'm in the South now. Right. And he came up and he said, darling, I love y'all's podcast, but y'all gotta slow down. And I realized that, that was it. I mean, and that's part of it. As a guest, sometimes too, you get wound up and you get to go in and, it's like, okay, let's dial it back a bit. And that is just part of knowing how to be a good guest.
Yeah. It's really helpful with butterflies too. If you're going on a podcast, you're recording a podcast, you should have some butterflies. And one recommendation I always say is like, if you can choose to speak 10% slower, that's going to help not only like you be a little bit more coherent, right. But also it's going to kind of nullify some of those butterflies, because it gives your brain a chance to kind of catch up. But yeah, if you're bringing that Yankee energy down south, it's like, oh, slow down.
I know, and yeah, and then he told me, "Oh, bless your heart," and it's like, oh, okay. But yeah, that's one of
We're
those
really in
phrases.
Atlanta now. Yeah,
Yep,
no,
yep.
it's great. It's the
Here I
best.
am.
I love
But
it.
being on a podcast, I mean, it really is about all of those kind of subtleties because not only do you want to be the good guest, we podcasters talk to each other. And more importantly, we're going to say, oh my gosh, I've got a great person that I talk to that you need to talk to also. And very rarely, I mean, I've done 730 some podcasts. I mean, that's quite a few. And
That
out of
puts you in
those,
the
yeah,
top
yeah,
1%.
yeah. Oh, I
At
like to
least,
talk,
probably.
right?
Yeah.
Less than five people. I mean, less than five people have I thought, ooh, and I also realized that was my fault. I somehow didn't find what I would click with them on.
Mm.
And so, it was just, okay, but I would never tell another host, hey, don't have them unless it was something really egregious.
Right.
Where maybe they didn't come prepared. I've had a couple people, it's really funny, who say, well, this is 30 minutes, right? I've only given you 30 minutes. And I'm like, you do understand the name is the Business Power Hour. And I had one that was 20 minutes. It was like I've scheduled, and I thought, okay. And I mean, it is a podcast. I can cut it short, but yeah, it's about kind of knowing some of those things too.
Yeah, 100%. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
It's polite,
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Before you're going to go be a guest at somebody's house, you look them up on Facebook.
Yeah, you do a little stalking.
Right.
That reminds me of I did my podcast for forever,
Mm-hmm.
8, 9, 10 years, something like that. And it sort of had different iterations. So, and sometimes I would go to people's offices and interview them on their home turf. And my favorite iteration was I bring them to mine, and I had a great podcast studio built. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But it really went off the rails pretty quick because in order to get them comfortable, because one thing, if you coming into my studio,
Mm-hmm.
man, that it really amplifies those butterflies a lot.
Right. They're like,
pretty
oh my
nervous.
gosh, this guy, this is Walter Cronkite here.
Yeah, exactly. You like put a glass of water and you're like, you comfortable here? Sit down. Here's some headphones. Okay, now talk close to the mic, not too close. So they're just like, they're amped up. And so to kind of calm them down and kind of make them feel at home, I'd say like, hey, if you're a fighter, you're walking to the ring, what's your walkout music? And so they tell me a song, and I'd put on that song as the intro of the podcast and get to talking to them about the podcast or about the song. But the whole podcast was derailed. I mean, we spend like 35, 45 minutes sometimes, the whole entire thing, just going over this song and making jokes and cracking up about it and not getting anywhere with the podcast. But to me, it was my favorite thing, because it was spontaneous, and it was a way of playing with those jitters and nerves in an interesting way that really got to know the person in a cool way, and did kind of have a fun segue into the next section. But, then the podcast ends up being 90 minutes, 2 hours. And now what are you doing? We got stuff to do here, but it was a fun time for sure.
But, you just hit on something that is so important. It is a way for people to get to know the person that's being interviewed. And my job is to do that, to, really get that, get to elicit the answers. And then it comes back to that whole know, like, trust. I'm getting to know you a little bit more, so I'm probably going to trust you. And then maybe I will do business with you, or, at least check you out a little bit more. And so this is a great way for people to really get their personal brand awareness out there.
Oh, it's the best. Yeah, it's the best. I mean, you get to know somebody pretty well from a podcast typically. I mean, there's definitely the hot seat type places where you're shooting numbers back and forth, but shows like yours, conversational shows, it should be a differentiator, and that's assuming that you're a decent person. I mean, some folks that maybe they shouldn't go on podcasts.
Oh yeah.
But generally speaking, if you're passionate about what you're doing, and it means something to you, that's going to come through. And it gives you opportunity to kind of dive into it with kindred spirits. I mean, the other thing is like the entrepreneurs that we're working with, their friends and partners don't want to hear about their business anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the staff doesn't want to hear
Yep.
about it.
Like,
Like
nah,
they're
I don't want to
delivering
know
ear
that you
beatings.
started in your garage.
Yeah, they're just like, bro, man, I know. Please stop talking about your work. And so, you kind of run out of people to talk about. But when you're so passionate about it,
Mm-hmm.
like this is a place for you where you have similar people that it's particularly in like business podcasts where people are solving problems and they're looking to podcasts as resources. So you have like an audience who's like, yeah, man, tell me what you do. I
Mm-hmm.
really want to hear about it, and to get that enthusiasm from your friends and family, sometimes it's just not going to happen.
Right. And we mentioned going on just, 3 or 4 a month. Part of that is by design, because if you're saying it too many times, then it loses that luster also. It's kind of the, you talk about being in music. I used to be a theater person. And about,
Oh,
the
cool.
50th time you perform something, it's really hard sometimes to get excited to be in that role.
Oh, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'm sure for you, 700 episodes, there's all kinds of little tricks you have to keep you interested. And that's kind of a fun thing as podcasting becomes old hat to you. We also do media training, but we
Mm-hmm.
call it story crafting,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of folks that we work with are like, oh, I've done media training. And it's like,
Right.
well, it's not that really.
Mm-hmm.
It's about like organizing your anecdotes in different ways. So if
Mm-hmm.
you've got, let's say you start with a half a dozen, you do another session, we got a dozen, you have a dozen different anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
And like, these are the highlights, your highlight reel of your stories.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can walk into that podcast interview and be like, I want to get these 2 stories in. And so it becomes kind of like a fun challenge,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it gives you a basis to kind of get some of the material out that you want to work with.
Right. Let's talk more about how you work with people. So, only twice, I think, have I ever had somebody tell me, this is my first podcast. And my usual thought is, oh, crap. And it's more, I'm thinking, okay, you shouldn't have picked an hour, as your first podcast. They both went well. But I made an extremely concerted effort to make sure that this was a good experience for them. I didn't want them to be done and think I'm never doing this again. But, how do you work with people? So you've got their messaging down. Do you do practice interviews? I mean, how do you do all of this?
We support them a lot moving up to it. When I talk about big emotions, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times people are like, oh, this would be cool. This is kind of a novel thing. Yeah, I want to do podcasting. So we start going through those conversations in the beginning. It's like, wow, well, hey, maybe I didn't think about like the outcomes I want. Maybe I don't know who my ideal client is. Some of this information might not be on the tip of your tongue, and then we move into the media kit and we're like, hey, tell me about yourself. Mm-hmm. What do you like to do? And if you haven't done that, if anybody has written a bio, it's excruciative.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
terrible. It's the worst.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh my
God. Don't write your own. I mean, that's one of the best things. Have somebody else write it for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You start looking at yourself, you're like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Why would anybody want to talk to me? Mm-hmm. This is terrible. So we get through that and then they have to look at it. It's like, well, here's who you said you are. And they're like, well, I don't like that. And I don't like that. And you're like, okay. It's an iterative process. And we understand all this. We know that like these emotions come up. Mm-hmm. So we get them through that. We start booking them on shows. And the way that I think we're most nurturing to our clients is we're very process driven and they know where everything is at all times. We're very white glove because we know we're dealing with people's like secrets. Sometimes we're dealing with people's hopes, dreams, aspirations, and fears. We bring them in for a storycraft session, spend an hour with them of like milling up some challenging material oftentimes and sending it back to them in a document that they can use in podcasting. And at that point, we send them on their way. We'll typically check in midway through the campaign and say, hey, how's it going? Do you want to do kind of an audit? We could we could certainly like listen to some shows and see if there's room for improvement. And some folks really love that, particularly like technical founders,
Right.
people that spend a lot of time in front of glowing rectangles and not so much flesh and blood people. They're great at podcasts, but oftentimes I think they're a little bit insecure. So we're there to have people and systems that they can count on and rely on to help them get through this and hopefully flourish,
Right. Right. Well, let's go to the opposite. What mistakes have you seen people make?
Oh boy, a lot of like innocent mistakes. It's 2021, 2022, just about, and the vernacular and slang changes a lot all the time. So the only real mistakes I've seen is people saying the wrong word. And the 3 times that it's been,
so I can't talk about Facebook anymore. It has to be Meta.
Well, I don't know. The goons from Meta might hunt you down for that.
I know.
There was a time when a client had said fisting instead of fist bump. So
yikes.
that was, and he didn't understand why they're giggling. The podcast hosts were giggling, but in every time something like that's happened, we've found a remedy. Because like we don't encourage folks to be too centered on trying to edit. It's like if you say something, walk back from it, be like, actually, that's not what I meant. Let me unpack that and give them some tips to like be able to correct himself in real time, because it's actually more interesting for the listener. But the only mistakes are just kind of innocent ones where maybe they're saying the wrong word. If I could think of another example, it would be just people that were, how do you say it, rude, If you're kind of a rude person, podcasting is probably not a good idea for you.
Right.
But otherwise, I think if you're generally sympathetic, then it's probably going to be a great solution for you.
Right. And then there are things like after the program. It continues to amaze me. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this a long time. When, I send somebody, my producer, you talk about having a team. Oh my gosh, I couldn't do this without my producer. But she'll send the information. She'll say, hey, your podcast is live today, yada, yada, yada. And then we hear crickets. If they promote it, they don't tag, and we're pretty good. I mean, our stuff says, here's how to tag us. Here's, all of those various things. And so either they're not tagging right, and so we're just not seeing it, or they're not promoting it. And then of course my thought is, didn't they like it? And the funny thing is, when I have been the guest on people's programs, I've done the same thing.
I know.
It's just like,
it's interesting, right?
I know. They'll say, I'll get the note, it'll say you're going live, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do it in a minute. And then 3 days later, I'm like, oops.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's a really interesting phenomenon. We do help people. We have a separate product called the Podcast Content Studio, where we help people create marketing assets for podcasts they've been on. And the people that love it, because we build them artwork. We get great quotes from the podcast, and we build kind of SEO rich blog content based on the thing. But then there's other folks that are like, and I don't know why, but it's comforting for me to hear that you have the same experience where it's just like, I want to promote it, but I don't know. There's a block there.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I do. I'm like, I really enjoyed it, but then, I totally forget to promote it. I mean, what works best, and I'll be honest with you on this, is when they promote it, I see it and share it. I'm like, oh yeah, this was great to be on there. And so that's, that's a cheat way to do this, folks. This is perfectly fine to do this. If you're on a podcast and they promote it on social media, it's okay to just share what they did. I mean, you don't have
or
to
just
start
like
over.
it. I mean, the other thing is that social media is kind of icky now. you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, mhm,
there's something kind of gross about it.
mhm.
So there's other ways you can share it. One thing I like to do is make a recommendation that in your email signature, build a page on your website that says my podcast episodes.
Mhm.
And then in your email signature, it's like, hey, if you want to listen to my podcast episodes, click here.
Right.
So it's a way it's more passive, and it's
Mhm.
not really logging into the Zuckerberg meta
Right.
universe or whatever
Mhm.
ungodly thing he's making over there.
But you should be doing this on LinkedIn. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's what LinkedIn's for.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That's why LinkedIn's there. If you're going to be on LinkedIn, like be on LinkedIn. And, our kind of take is like, why not have a Cadillac impression on LinkedIn? Like,
Right.
do it
Mhm.
right. And podcasts are the best way to do it.
Right. Yeah. And again, I mean, it's easy enough just to share the link from the show, add a little bit. Really love this. Thought we had great conversation. I mean, just don't, but yeah, then you're not having to redo it. But from a PR perspective, you should also know anytime that you're mentioned somewhere. I mean, that's just so you should be keeping track of that anyway.
Yep. And if you are mentioned, say thank you.
Mhm.
In the podcast world, the way you say thank you is rating and review the podcast.
Yep. Oh,
You
yeah.
go on the podcast,
Mhm.
rate and review the show.
Mhm.
It's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And hopefully give us 5 stars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Don't review it unless it's 5 stars.
Yes.
That's also the rule.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, Ryan, we've only got a couple minutes left. This has been so much fun. And clearly, I mean, it's a passion for both of us. But tell us more about Kitcaster. How do people find you? What are the services that you provide and things like that?
Cool. You just go to kitcaster.com. There's a real easy button. Just hit apply now.
Mhm.
Send an application through that goes through our account executives.
Mhm.
If it's a good fit, check it out. But there's a ton of resources there
Mhm.
for podcasting, for marketing of podcasting, for podcasting and PR. Our content team does a fantastic job, because I mean it when I say it. We really want to be the best in the world at this.
Right.
And I think we're well on our way.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I was looking at that. I'm looking at an article right now, preparing for podcast interviews. And you've got boom, 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 boom. So even if you're doing this on your own, there's great content there.
Yeah, totally. We're advocates of the podcast as a medium and as a net positive for culture. So we want to help people. Our mission is to celebrate good conversation. It's not booking podcasts, it's celebrate good conversation. So that's what we're trying to do.
Mhm. And it is about having those conversations. And I think for someone who's wanting to go on podcasts, that's what you need to remember. It's about having that conversation with the host and just, talking to them like you would, if we actually could meet in places and have coffee.
Yeah, exactly. But an hour coffee with somebody is impossible to get now.
Right. Oh, I know. But yeah, it's, it is about having those conversations, building those relationships. And as you do that, then it does rub off, and the listeners and the viewers feel that. And if you can't, if you're not that warm, fuzzy person, then it could be a challenge.
100%. Absolutely. Although we've had some success with curmudgeons.
Well, and it depends on what you're talking about, right? I mean, like the guy who was talking about internet security with me, that was kind of a curmudgeonly type of thing. But yeah, and obviously it depends on the subject and on the program as to the conversation that you're going to have.
100%. You definitely don't need to be a bubbly person. I think, you do it. There's a nice polarity there. Like if you're a serious type person, great. That works. If you're a friendly person, that works great too. If you're kind of in the middle, I don't know. But generally speaking, if people have a desire to do podcasts, I encourage it any possible way they can.
Right.
And they'll have success at it.
Right. And don't expect it to be perfect. I think that is probably the biggest thing that people tell me, because they'll say, we want to be a guest, but,
Right.
and I tell them, get past that. If you have a good host, they'll make it as painless as possible.
Absolutely. I like to give the advice, don't judge your appearance until you're your 100th episode
Right.
as published,
Mhm.
because the paralysis by analysis is real.
Mhm.
You don't sound like how you think you're going to sound. You
Right.
listen to yourself back, you're like, who is that person? And
Oh, yeah.
what are they doing with my mouth?
That's what I sound
Let it
like.
go.
Oh, mhm.
Yeah, let it go. It's good to be critical, but wait till the 100th episode. Give yourself some room to, make mistakes.
Right. Right. I love it. And you will make mistakes. You'll forget to read somebody's bio at the start of the program. And these things happen. I mean, that's the important thing is, as you said, we walk our way through it and we go on.
100%.
Well, Ryan, this has been absolutely fabulous. And as we said, you just go to kitcaster.com. Great information. You've got your contact information there too. So, people can reach out to you. Do you have any final thoughts for anyone?
I don't, but I just want to say thank you to you, Deb. This has been a really fun interview, but also for being welcoming to our clients is wonderful. And I just really appreciate what you do. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And as we talked about at the beginning of the program, there's some that I'm looking for from you. So, that's,
yeah.
And that's, that's one of the things too, is it is about the relationships, as we were saying.
Everything that's
Perfect.
worth anything is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I am Deb Creer. I've been having the absolute most wonderful discussion about why you really need to go be on podcasts with Ryan Estes of Kitcaster. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.